Michael had always been the son every parent prayed for. Devout, disciplined, and quietly brilliant. He led family devotions, served diligently in church, and was often the example cited at youth meetings. Raised in a strict Christian household, Michael internalized the belief that righteousness was not just a virtue. It was a guarantee. Do right, and life would reward you. But medical school rewrote that equation. He found himself standing in a different kind of sanctuary. One filled with long nights, clinical rotations, and exams that left no room for prayer meetings or quiet reflection. Somewhere between anatomy dissections and endless ward rounds, Michael's certainty began to unravel. By his third year, the grind of medical school chipped away at the values he'd once held dear. The shift wasn't sudden. It was the kind of slow erosion that comes when you're tired, broke, and watching peers cut corners to get ahead. Why should I suffer for doing things the right way? He found himself asking, more often than he was comfortable admitting. His descent wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent. What began as skipped church services turned into ignored ethical lines. And soon, Michael stopped being the example and started becoming the cautionary tale. By his fourth year, pathology and pharmacology almost drove him mad with stress. Weeks later, during the Christmas holiday of this fourth year, Michael made a practical decision: stay back on campus to study for an important exam in January. The dorms were quieter, and with fewer distractions, he hoped to make the most of his time. But his resources were thin. One night, while looking for food, he discovered a stash of provisions left behind by a younger colleague who had traveled home. At first, he hesitated. The old Michael would have walked away. But the new Michael, hungry and tired, made a different choice. He rationalized, "It's not like they'll notice. I'm just borrowing." And with that, he took a few items: milk, biscuits, sardines, noodles, and convinced himself it was harmless. But the guilt lingered, a dull ache he pushed aside by burying himself in his notes. After passing the exam, Michael moved into his 500-level year with fresh momentum. His grades improved, his confidence returned, but so did the compromises. During an external posting at a rural hospital, he was assigned a simple task after assisting 3 long surgeries: distribute 7 plates of food to the medical staff. He had to scrub out, go to the cafeteria and get them, plus a bag of water. Hence he decided to keep 2 plates for himself, and lied to the nurse who sent him about it when questioned. It was a minor deception, but one that gnawed at him longer than he expected. Later that week, at a local shop near the hospital, he bought a few items and quietly slipped a roll-on deodorant into his bag without paying. His heart pounded as he walked out, but no one stopped him. "It's just survival," he told himself again. Yet, these justifications were becoming harder to believe. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the whirring of a ceiling fan, he found himself staring at the ceiling and whispering a half-hearted prayer. "God, am I still me?" Haunted by the confrontation, Michael tried to course-correct. At the end of the posting, he participated in a donation drive for the hospital. It was genuine, at least in part. But he knew the act was also an attempt to silence the guilt growing louder inside him. Back on campus, however, old habits returned. The theft of the Oraimo FreePods 4 was more than an impulse. It was calculated. He saw a fellow student's earpods unattended and took them. Fortunately for Michael, it was not the trackable type. Weeks later, Michael took the earpods to the reading room, but left it on the table while he went to use the restroom. When he came out, the owner had passed by and checked it out while he was in the restroom and was waiting for him to come out so he could confront him about ownership. Michael doubled down. He gaslighted, denied, and spun a narrative confusing enough that when the case was reported to the hall administrator, Mr. Bryan could only shrug after hearing both sides and seizing the earpods for investigation. Later that month, Michael went to the hall admin to request the earpods as he needed to study with them. But Mr. Bryan gave Michael his own personal earpods since the seized one was under investigation. 3 weeks later, it got faulty in Michael's custody. So seeing that he did not have the financial wherewithal to replace Mr. Bryan's pods, he pulled off another deception, swapping the pods with a different student's identical functional pair and returning that to Mr. Bryan instead, while waiting for the pods he stole, which had been seized by the Mr. Bryan, to be returned. It worked. But this time, the guilt didn't fade. 5 weeks later, the investigation was concluded and both sides were invited to Mr. Bryan's office, where the pods was returned to the owner instead of Michael. However, due to reasonable doubt, no punishment was dealt to Michael, as they both had believable stories. The following Christmas, Michael stayed in school, but the option of dorms was not available, so he slept in classrooms, studied in silence, and relied on his stockpile of snacks for sustenance. But by the end of the first week, the hunger grew unbearable. One night, during the weekend, when the shops in school were closed for religious purposes, he remembered that he could go see if any of the friendly doctors were on call, so he could request call food. However, seeing neither the friendly or unfriendly, he went into the medical call room and took a plate of food meant for the house officers. After the weekend, on Monday, the missing plate was reported, and the nurses around had said they saw a medical student in the call room enter the call room, but it did not make much sense as they believed the students were on holiday. Later that day, a resident doctor saw Michael, asked him why he was in school, and also asked about the allegation. He denied it initially, but subsequently decided to confess. His phone was seized as the resident tried to figure out if he had been involved in other thefts, but was later returned as it was the last day of the year and he needed to speak with his family. The resident also informed his family of Michael's actions, to which they begged for mercy. After barely avoiding suspension, Michael decided to do better the next year. So he buried himself in both study and songwriting. Yes, songwriting. Music had always been his secret escape, a passion buried beneath textbooks and white coats. He began recording songs in his makeshift dorm studio, pouring his guilt, confusion, and dreams into lyrics. After receiving $700,000 in partial school fees, he split it, some for tuition, some for food, and the rest on music production equipment and animation software. He even enrolled in a YouTube course and bought advanced AI voice tools. While his peers studied for exams, Michael was up editing beats and crafting visuals, hoping that it would help him remake the partial school fees he had spent, as he did not want to tell his parents that he had done so without profit. To him it wasn't irresponsible, he still studied. But he had found a second identity, one that gave him joy and one that held a promise of him not stealing anymore if it turned out to be profitable. 3 weeks later, his debut song hit 1,034 streams on Spotify. A small win, but a win nonetheless. Only family member that knew he was dabbling into music while in med school was his younger sister, although the family were now more sensitive to his needs and reached out to him regularly. For the first time, Michael saw 3 possible futures. One as a doctor, a musician, and a content creator. And he had also began envisioning the day he would be able to pay his expensive school fees by himself instead of stressing his parents. The pull of the music world was strong. He considered attending parties, promoting his work more aggressively, even letting academics slide a little. But something in him hesitated. The same student who had stolen food and earpods now hesitated. That was new. Michael didn't become a saint overnight. He still struggled, still had urges to cut corners. But he began doing small things, returning lost items without credit, volunteering for hospital cleanup shifts, mentoring a junior student through a tough anatomy course. People noticed. Mr. Bryan, who once called him in for theft, now nodded respectfully when he passed. Michael had rebuilt something far more valuable than a clean record. He had reclaimed self-respect. Years later, Michael graduated from medical school with his degree, fees paid in full, and his dignity. But he didn't give up music and content creation. Instead, he found a way to fuse these worlds. He began organizing community health events with live performances, using music to draw crowds and deliver health education in rural areas. His lyrics, now full of hard-earned wisdom, resonated with both patients and peers. He posted videos discussing health topics, then layered them with storytelling and melody. The channel grew, is still growing along with his credibility. Michael's story, once whispered in hallways as a cautionary tale, became a model of reinvention. He mentored students who struggled like he had. He taught them that survival doesn't require surrendering one's soul. That mistakes don't define you. Your response does. He wasn't perfect. He didn't pretend to be. But he had grown. Michael's journey through moral failure and redemption wasn't a detour, it was the curriculum no lecture ever taught. His life is proof that even when you've stolen, lied, and fallen short, you can still rise, still create, still heal. Not despite your past, but because of it.